Destination Africa, brought to you by Standard Bank.
Andrew, I'm going to start off with you because we've been down this road before talking about the fact that when it comes to Africa's infrastructure situation, it is time for transformation. The question is transformation happening fast enough in your books?
Alishia, I think there's been progress over the past few years, but just for a moment to put things into context, it's estimated that some $38 billion is required annually to rehabilitate and build new infrastructure in Africa. And a similar amount for maintenance and operation of infrastructure as well. So, it's a huge challenge. First of all, securing that funding, and then making sure it's then dispersed into projects and programs which allow for economic growth.
Yeah.
And I think there's widespread consensus, not just among Africa's leadership, but major lending institutions, NGOs, that until this infrastructure deficit is addressed, that's going to significantly stall Africa's economic growth going forward.
Jeannot, while the blueprints seem to be there, it doesn't necessarily translate into effective implementation all the time. I mean, hurdles you see when it comes to effective implementation?
I will say that, as we all know, infrastructure development is key in growing economies in sub-Saharan Africa. But at the same time, we have some issues that we've seen which come in essentially in terms of policy and regulation, which needs to be conducive to doing business. Because remember that the majority of infrastructure projects in Africa are essentially driven by government. So it's about linking this idea from a politician point of view to making it a bankable project. So you've got the policy regulation, and then you also have the cost recovery issues that we are facing in some African countries. How do you make a project feasible or bankable in the sense that you need to recoup some cash from your investment? And if the project is not properly funded by the private sector because of the cost recovery issue, it might need to be that the government might provide some subsidies, and this will have an impact on the fiscus as a whole.
Raymond, when it comes to recouping that investment, a lot of focus on what something like the development we've seen in Port Harcourt will spell for economic development, economic growth moving forward. So let's use that Nigerian example, getting a Nigerian perspective on what you see that development specifically opening up for the Nigerian economy.
Well, I'm not sure how specific I should be in responding to this. The fact of the matter is that infrastructure development speeds up economic development. It's kind of a catalyst. So one mustn't look in a very narrow context at how cost recovery would happen. There's a snowballing effect or impact on the total economy. So the insert we were presented with, shows a new city coming up with downstream infrastructure, supporting infrastructure, and one would then expect that economic activity would match that development, and eventually there would be growth not only in the local, in the Port Harcourt context, but also in the rest of the economy. So that's the kind of impact, downstream impact I would expect. And it's important to configure the benefit in that context. Otherwise, one could take an isolated view and wonder why spend so much money, in a particular locality.
Andrew, it's exactly that should be providing, the incentive, that looking at it holistically in terms of the kind of benefits, investment or return on investment that could be reaped from projects like this. We had Ernst & Young in the past week show that FDI projects into Africa have increased 87%. The question is, how much of that is being directed down this avenue and investment into infrastructure specifically?
Well, Alishia, I think first of all, let's stand back for a moment, because those FDI figures, I think they reached highs in 2008. I'm under correction, but I think the level was around about 90 billion US dollars. Ernst & Young's report I'm yet to read, but certainly that trend it's back on the right side of the curve. But if I could just quickly pick up on a point you raised a moment ago, in terms of the capacity to actually effectively implement projects. Now, it's all very well having the funding in place, but at the end of the day, whether the project owner, that could be a roads authority or a power utility or a water supply and sanitation company, if they don't have the requisite skills to roll that project out, that funding really is going to be, in many cases, misused. And I've just returned from the World Bank, and that's a reoccurring theme. It's a concern that the bank has. It's in terms of providing funding to implementing agencies. Are the recipients of this funding actually skilled up to then manage their projects effectively? Now, in part, that can be addressed by outsourcing responsibilities to external consultants, bringing them in, if need be, embedding them within implementing agencies. But the concern going forward is this needs to be addressed, the capacity building aspect of projects. And I think in South Africa we can relate to that, where we've seen, particularly at a municipal level, where the funding is there, but unfortunately the rollout of projects and programs has been very slow.
Of course, that's just one factor to consider, Raymond, in terms of why we're seeing this hesitance of private money going down this avenue, right?
Yes, indeed. And I think that when it comes to infrastructure development, one mustn't take short-term views. I've heard what Andrew said, possibly about integrating outsourced consultancy input. But it's critical that the country builds own skills and takes a long-term view. So, the imperatives that we have in the country at the moment, right through, the schooling system, the university system, to generate appropriate skills, must also translate to the workspace, where people are inducted into the projects that are going on, and not only the initial construction phase, but also the maintenance, the operating phase of the project and the ongoing maintenance.
Jeannot, are clear enough targets being set? Because I came across a UN office in NEPAD OECD Africa Investment Initiative report saying that $93 billion is needed annually. Standard Bank's most recent estimates suggest Africa has a new annual infrastructure requirement of $40 billion. We've had South Africa's President Jacob Zuma concur with Standard Bank's figure. Are there clear enough targets in terms of what's actually needed?
I think the most important aspect is that some projects are being identified by government, whether local or the African government, and I think the targets are here. If you look at the spectrum of projects that are currently pushed for being developed across the continent, you've got a massive transportation project funded in South Africa. 80 billion rand needs to be invested in transport infrastructure only by 2013. That's quite massive. So you've got a lot of projects in terms of transportation project, in terms of gas infrastructure, in terms of small power or even large power station, where and in the majority of these cases, Standard Bank is involved. We are currently advising and arranging on a lot of projects across the spectrum of the infrastructure space, from transportation, road transportation project to small power, to gas, to etc. And it's not so much in South Africa only, and it's also across African countries such as Mozambique and Kenya and Nigeria. So I think the targets are clear. It's all about bringing together the private and the public sector.
Yeah. What's interesting is that we do see an opening up of IPPs and the possibility becoming more real as we progress. What's your view?
Well, Alishia, I think that going forward we're going to see a lot more PPP projects, albeit I think there's still reticence among certain African countries to release state assets. They want to, in some cases, guard those closely. But when it comes to, I think first and foremost, power generation, PPP projects, we've seen a number of successful projects on the continent. But something that I think needs to be raised, Alishia, is that, and you were talking about a moment ago about targets being set, and in many cases those targets are in place. But frequently what we see is individual country development agendas almost taking precedence over what should be done for the region. And again, let me go back to what came out of this recent World Bank trip that I undertook, is that there's suddenly far greater emphasis on regional integration, whether that be constructing railways or roads that go cross-border. Obviously, power is a good example where power can be generated in one country and then put onto not only the national grid, but then onto a regional grid as well. And I think the reality is that a lot of the countries in Africa are too small to go it alone. I don't mean to be disparaging when I say that, but it's a question of standing back, looking at the bigger picture, who's got the resources, and how best can the region as a whole then benefit from exploiting those resources.